Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Nickel, and I will moderate this evening's tribunal. For those unfamiliar with me, I am a member of Just Moms STL. I first want to thank you for coming out this evening. This is a busy time of year, and I know you've all made a big sacrifice to be here, and we greatly appreciate it. This is a public tribunal to investigate the question, is there any evidence of human rights violations occurring here in the communities that surround the Westlake Bridgeton Superfund site? For those unfamiliar with this type of hearing, let me explain the process for you. First, about the United Nations Council. Due to the critical urgency of the situation here with the Westlake Bridgeton Superfund site, the findings from this hearing will be sent directly to the United Nations Human Rights Council. Often, the United Nations holds their own forums. However, with climate talks in Paris and the urgency of this situation, the tribunal proceedings will be sent to Mr. John Knox of the United Nations Human Rights and Environment Program for his guidance of the next steps. The United Nations Human Rights and Environment Program's mandate is as follows. Building on several other resolutions related to human rights and the environment and human rights and climate change, the Human Rights Council established the mandate for the independent expert on human rights and the environment during its 19th session in Resolution 2012. In 2015, the Human Rights Council decided to extend the mandate and special rapporteur on the issue of human rights obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for a period of 3 years. The Human Rights Council requested the special rapporteur, among other things, to 1, continue to study the human rights obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. 2, continue to identify, promote, and exchange views on good practices relating to human rights obligations and commitments to inform, support, and strengthen environmental policy making, especially in the area of environmental protection. 3, promote and report on the realization of human rights obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and to disseminate his findings by inter alia, continuing to give particular emphasis to practical solutions with regard to their implementation. 4, working on identifying challenges and obstacles to the full realization of human rights and obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment and protection gaps thereto, including the context of sustainable development. Here is how this works, the format of this evening's event. 1, in the front of the room are experts, which I will introduce in a moment. Each of these experts have volunteered to serve as jurists. Their responsibility is to listen to the evidence presented at this hearing around the question of human rights violations. After all the testimony is complete, the jurists will meet and based on the evidence presented, provide a written documentation outlining their findings and recommendations. This document will be sent to the United Nations Human Rights Council. 2, the jurists are permitted to ask questions, clarifying questions only, of the people testifying and presenting evidence to the investigation. 3, those testifying are limited to 2 minutes of oral presentation. Witnesses are permitted and welcome to submit to the jurist a longer document in writing to supplement their oral testimony. 4, the hearing is being recorded by audio and video format. 5, we have a list of 18 witnesses that have requested to testify. If time allows, we will open the floor to others who may want to testify. They too will also be limited to the 2 minutes of time, but can submit written testimony in any length needed to support their facts and opinions. 6, at 8:15, the jurists will meet and discuss what they have heard, and at 8:30, will present to those in the room their preliminary findings and recommendations, if warranted. Again, these will be preliminary findings and recommendations, with final completed within a few weeks after the hearing. Lastly, before I introduce our jurist, I want to let you know that the final findings on whether there are human rights violations and recommendations for action will be submitted to the United Nations Human Rights and Environment Program, Mr. John Knox. Now, let me introduce to you our panel of jurists. First, we have Chairman of the Jury, Lois Marie Gibbs. Dr. Gibbs comes to us from the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, a national nonprofit organization that has worked in the field for 35 years. She entered the field through her own experiences of human rights violations from a historical waste site in Niagara Falls, New York, the Love Canal landfill. Jurist number 2, Dr. Brandon Hayes, Director of Community Engagement, Deaconess Foundation, has master's degree in both public and business administration from the University of Missouri and Kennesaw State University, respectively. A bachelor's degree in mass communications from Louisiana State University, and has served as a performance auditor for both the cities of Kansas City, Missouri and Atlanta, Georgia. Jurist number 3, Jennifer Bernstein. Jennifer is the Director of Advocacy and Communications at Central Reformed Congregation, the only synagogue in St. Louis City. She works closely with Rabbi Susan Talby on a variety of social justice issues, most notably Medicaid expansion, environmental issues, women's rights, and poverty. She has a master's in social work from the Brown School at Washington University, and in her spare time enjoys listening to music, needlepointing, and spending time with her family. She lives in Creve Coeur with her husband Scott and son Ari, and has been working with Just Moms. Dawn and Karen spoke at CRC over a year ago. Jurist number 4, Sister Jean Durr with Franciscan Sisters of Mary. Sister Jean is a seasoned Franciscan Sister of Mary from St. Louis, Missouri. She is an artist and advocate for environmental justice and care of Earth, our common home. She is grateful for all the gifts that being a daughter of Earth gives her daily, and she hopes to be a generous and responsible ancestor to the generations that will follow her. Jurist number 5, LaRonda Wilson. LaRonda Wilson is an associate professor of sociology at St. Louis Community College, Florissant Valley campus. She is the program coordinator for the sociology and anthropology programs and teaches criminal justice. LaRonda is also the service learning coordinator for the campus. So now I would just like to thank our jurists for serving, and if you all would like to just take a minute to share with us what compels you to join us in this important role.
Thank you, Karen. What compels me is that I want to see if there really is evidence here of human rights violation, environmental violations, and take it to the next level, because if there is some, we really need to move it there, because the United States has not done a tremendous job in this community alone.
I kind of echo those sentiments, and just knowing what we've been hearing in the past couple of years, just astonished at what's going on, and need to see what we can do to make sure that this problem gets solved.
I am a resident of Maryland Heights, near Bridgeton, but I'm also an advocate for youth in my job, and if this is something that's going to affect our children, and we need to do something about it immediately.
Hi, since I met the moms, when I first met the moms, they made my jaw drop with the information. And since I've met them, hearing the information that they've had to share, my students have made connections to both Coldwater Creek and Laddie Avenue. And as they dig deeper, they've made connections with further generations. And I have made personal connections to 2 dear friends that I've lost. One that I lost in October to a rare cancer. So I'm proud to know them, support them, engage my students with them, and work with them toward this movement to justice and humanity.
I'm with the Franciscan Sisters of Mary, and we have a commitment to compassionate care for creation. We also are residents in Bridgeton, and in the last 3 years we've been deeply involved with the moms and with the effort to see justice brought to this area and to restore the earth here, restore the area to a safe and welcoming environment for residents and businesses in the area. So my being here is just part of that concern.
Thank you. Let me give you a short description of the situation we have for those who are new to this issue. A smoldering landfill fire is moving toward the known areas of radioactive waste at the Westlake landfill in St. Louis County. Families living near the landfills have been told recently by the state of Missouri that a Chernobyl-like radioactive event could happen in 3 to 6 months. Furthermore, the smoldering fire has released toxic landfill gas into surrounding communities for the last 5 years and is expected to smolder for 5 more years. Radioactive materials were illegally dumped at the landfill originating from processing uranium in St. Louis for nuclear weapons waste during World War II Manhattan Project's waste. Nowhere else in America is there a smoldering fire hundreds of feet away from high levels of radioactive materials. Innocent families cannot and should not have to live with this imminent threat and ongoing radioactive and toxic exposure. The state health authorities have documented an increased number of childhood brain cancer, over 300 times that would be expected, respiratory and other diseases. We will now begin with the testimony portion of the hearing. Remember, you have 2 minutes, and we will remind you at 1 minute and then at the stop time. Please remember to state your name and your in the city location you reside. I will now call on Kristen Camuso as our first witness.
Good evening, esteemed jurist. My name is Kristen Camuso. I currently live in St. Peters, but as little as 6 months ago, I was a longtime Maryland Heights resident. While living in Maryland Heights, my family and I found ourselves in a perpetual state of apprehension and vulnerability caused by the unsafe conditions at the Westlake Bridgeton landfill, where an underground fire currently burns, releasing countless toxins into the environment. Every day this fire burns, it inches its way closer towards the nuclear weapons waste housed within the landfill. On many occasions, the odor coming from the burning Superfund site held us as prisoners in our own home and kept us from enjoying the outdoors. Within the first year of the landfill fire, my daughter was diagnosed with asthma. Up until then, she had never experienced difficulty breathing. As a parent, watching your child gasp for air is intensely terrifying and left us with a sense of helplessness. Because of my exposure to the same waste in Coldwater Creek, I know firsthand the profound consequences this radioactive waste has on the human body. In the last 3 years, I've had my gallbladder removed, a total hysterectomy, 1 adrenal gland removed, and thyroid cancer. More recently, doctors found a tumor on my remaining adrenal gland and a lesion in my liver. Nothing could have prepared me for the severe perceptual alteration I experienced once the truth set in. Simple things that I no longer take for granted, like feeling the wind on your face, watching your kid playing in the park, doing yard work, eating food from your own garden, and even drinking a glass of water from the tap, have now taken on a new meaning. My perception of the world around me now filters through the dirty lens of fear and constant worry. Watching this affect my daughter's health and knowing the dangers this out-of-control Superfund site poses, even more so if the fire reaches the nuclear waste, my partner and I made the heartbreaking decision to move away from the area, away from our home, away from the schools we loved, and away from our friends and family. This site took away our right to a healthy, clean environment and forced us from the place we called home. It's worth noting, my daughter has not had to use her rescue inhaler since we've moved. Thank you.
Next up, we have Debbie Disser.
Hi, my name is Debbie Disser, and I'm from St. John. My brother Doug, my sister, and myself played in the parks and streams by our home, which included Coldwater Creek. We played softball and baseball, held festivals and other events on the Berkeley ball fields that our parents had worked so hard to create, unaware that the fields were across from the contaminated St. Louis Airport storage site. We learned when I was a teenager that the ball fields were contaminated and would have to be closed. Back then, much to my regret, I did not question what the contamination was or how it would affect myself or my family. Doug worked near the Westlake Superfund site and was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 2007. It was a glioblastoma multiforme stage 4 and the size of a baseball when they removed it. We lost Doug in 2008, just 17 days after his 43rd birthday. I myself have thyroid issues. My thyroid has nodules, and every January I have to have an ultrasound done. Last year I learned my 3 nodules had turned into 7, and I'm hoping to find out next month that they have not split into more and that they are still normal. I also work near the Superfund site. I go to work every day not knowing if I have to cover my face because of the stench from the landfill, not knowing when I will have a nosebleed or have to use my inhaler for my asthma. And last Thursday, I had to wear a face mask for the last 45 minutes of my workday as the stench had invaded my office floor. This was not the first occurrence, and sadly, it won't be the last. For 26 years, the EPA left Westlake to behave like an unattended child, to create havoc on the unsuspecting communities around this site. We in these communities are left to wonder what our future would have been like if this site had not been turned over to the EPA, but if it had instead been under the control of the U.S. Army Corps and the formerly utilized Sites Remedial Action Program. Would there have been a landfill fire? Would Spanish Village and mobile home residents still be there, or would they have been bought out a long time ago? A few months ago, I was told that those who survived the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings will never know if they survived, since it is unknown if what happened to them did not cause their death years later. We in this community will also never know the effect the landfill has had on us, but hopefully future generations will not wonder the same thing.
Thank you, Debbie. Isabella Richmond.
Hello, my name is Isabella Richmond. I am 12 years old and I live in St. Louis, Missouri. My mother has been sick for a few years with cancer. I had never had asthma until I moved here. One morning, the smell was so bad that it felt like my entire respiratory system was on fire. I had just started middle school and I made many good friends, but then we moved and I had to leave my friends behind. We shouldn't have to live in fear of sheltering in place. We shouldn't have to do that. Why should we have to move from the people we love because of a careless action made in the 1970s?
Marissa Kelby.
You're allowed to applaud. It's okay. You're also allowed to cry.
My name is Marissa Kelby. I am 14 years old and I live in Maryland Heights, 1.8 miles from the landfill. I am here tonight to share with you how...
We're going to have Beth Strohmeyer read Marissa's testimony.
My name is Marissa Kelby. I am 14 years old, and I live in Maryland Heights, 1.8 miles from the landfill. I'm here tonight to share with you how Westlake Landfill Superfund affects my life. Most mornings that I stand at the bus stop with 2 of my other friends, and we are covering our mouths with our sleeves or pulling our shirts up over our noses because the odor is so strong it makes you sick. Other days, my mom will have to drive me to school if the odor is so bad I can't stand it. Just about every single day, I experience headaches. Oftentimes, I visit the school nurse and have to lay down. This is taking time away from my classes, which often makes it difficult to catch up on missed work. Many of my friends have started moving away. When I ask them why they are moving, it seems to me to be the same response over and over. My parents do not want us living near the landfill. I have lost several of my friends in the past for 2 years because of this issue. There have been times where I can't even go outside to swim in our pool. My mom has made us come in several times because the stench was unbearable. One time, I wanted to play in the snow so bad, but the only way I could go out was even just for a few minutes, was if I wore a mask. When I was in 5th grade, we had to make an all about me memory book. One of the questions was, what are you afraid of? And my answer was getting sick from the landfill. My mom is Karen Nickel, co-founder of Just Moms STL, and a victim of exposure from the radioactive Coldwater Creek in the 70s and 80s when she was a child. My mom has systemic lupus. Of all the things that I have mentioned above are a violation of my rights, the most important violation is that my mom has been pulled away from our family for endless hours of work doing everything she can to protect me and other children. This should have never been her responsibility to do what she does in this fight. I watch my mom struggle to get out of bed, to push through the pain and keep going, and it makes me very angry that she has to do this, when it should have been the responsibility of our government to protect us. Where public services continues to betray me and strip me from my healthy air to breathe and keeps me full of anxiety on what is going to happen with this fire.
Is Carl Koenig here? Carly, sorry.
I am Carly Koenig. I'm 15 years old, and I've lived in Florissant, Missouri my entire life. As of recent in my life, I've been faced with the immediate dangers caused by the Westlake landfill fire and its increasing proximity to deadly radioactive material buried underground. Due to this increasing issue, my day-to-day activities have been faltered, and my basic human rights have been breached. I can no longer confidently say that the environment I am surrounded in is of adequate living standards. Not only am I consistently being exposed to particles of radiation that have been dispersed throughout the air, but I'm also living in constant fear of the consequences my family and I may face due to this exposure. In the end, if I were to be asked the question, do you feel your basic human right of having an adequate living standard is being met? My answer would be no. Aside from my meager state of living, I have found that my basic human right to a family has also been infringed upon. With the constant exposure of radiation, how can I safely say that any family I may want in the future won't be forced to face the consequences of radiation exposure? At 15 years old, how can I be sure that any children I may have in the future won't be mutated or born with severe birth defects because of radiation? How can I know whether I may be able to have any children at all? I feel robbed of my right to live safely and have a family of my own. I feel robbed of my basic human right. Now I present the question: how are we to seek protection? How are we supposed to move? Again, my basic human right has been stolen. I've been robbed of my right to move due to this issue at Westlake. My family and I are trapped. Even if we tried to move, how could we? Who would want to buy a home miles away from dangerous landfill fire that is fastly approaching toxic radioactive material? So yes, again, I am unable to move, and again, my basic human right has been stolen. This fire has been burning since 2010. The radioactive material has been there for decades. Who could say exactly what consequences we may all be paying for in the future due to this catastrophic issue? Who's to say that we aren't already paying for it? This issue needs to be addressed and dealt with by our politicians and our community leaders before more human rights are stolen.
Paul Berry.
To this honorable jury, my name is Paul Berry III. I've been a lifetime resident of Maryland Heights in Bridgeton, Missouri. Before I get to some of the testimony, there's some things that have not been considered by Republic or any report that I've seen that disturbs me regarding this site. One, what happens if we have an earthquake? We sit on the New Madrid Fault, and no model that I've seen from EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, Republic, State of Missouri, St. Louis County, or any other entity takes that in for account. a nuclear scientist by the name of Dr. Alvarez, who worked under the Bush administration, one of his top nuclear scientists. I asked him a question about 2 years ago, right around the corner from this place. And I asked him, what happens if we have a seismic event here? He says that you're going to have pockets in the ground. Those pockets can go from the top of the soil several feet down, and this stuff's going to be in the air. Also, we happen to sit in a major tornado plane. And I've asked the question, what happens if there's a tornado? The scientists can't even tell me, but they say it's going to be bad, Paul. We can't tell you where it's going to drop. It could drop 20 miles from here. Now, whether it's going to be a potent amount is going to determine how much of that's on the soil. I'm going to extend a little bit because there's some other things we need to talk about with this issue and why is this a United Nations issue. You've heard many horrible stories, but that doesn't mean that it's a human rights issue. And we're going to have to do more to get the attention of the United Nations, and this is what I proffer for you to proffer to them. The situation at the federal and state and local level regarding this issue is corrupt. Republic is a company that donates substantial amount of money in unlimited donations in the state of Missouri regarding this issue. Myself being involved in politics, there's now a campaign going on to promote the fact, and I'm going to ask for permission, jury, to extend, to promote the fact that people can get sick from us getting this waste out of here because it's going to be put on trains going through rural Missouri. And that's how they've been battling, trying to get us from addressing this issue. Nuclear waste already goes on these trains. It's a ridiculous proposition. At the federal level, we have a $150 billion Iran nuclear deal, which we've negotiated. Yet we have derelict nuclear waste left over from World War II sitting in the ground, not within containers. So how do we tie to the United Nations? Simple. This was the effect of war that we have not addressed. Had we left this on the battlefield of another nation, we would have problems. But because it sits here in Bridgeton, Missouri, half in one congressional district and half in another, we haven't wanted to take issue on this. I know I have medical issues, and there's always this one word that will affect every single one of these people here. It's called causation. But your mandate is not based upon causation. Your mandate is to figure out if there's human rights being violated. Just simply somebody being sick is not a violation of human rights. Failure to conduct yourself with war material like this, it should have never ended up in private hands in the first place. And the American government needs to take responsibility for letting such to happen. When the Manhattan Project was first installed, there was a contract between every producer, between Malkin Root and the federal government, and what it said was the government was responsible for all waste. They should not be allowed to shuck their responsibility. Democrats and Republicans need to take action on this, and I hope the United Nations sees it for what it is. Thank you.
Bob Terry.
Hello, my name is Bob Terry, and I'm a longtime resident of Florissant, Missouri, who now lives in Charlotte, Missouri. My history of my family is horrendous. The medical history of my family is horrendous. I lost my father to cancer. I lost my mother to symptoms of a failed thyroid. I lost an older brother who I never met of leukemia. I lost a grandfather from stomach cancer. I lost a father-in-law from working next to in Boeing. In 2010, my wife and I chose a private school that is in the neighborhood of most people in Bridgeton, and it coincided with something called a smoldering fire, which it's not smoldering, it's a fire. My kids were happy there for the first 2 years we went there. In year 2, I found out about Coldwater Creek. Amazing that I lived in Florissant for 40 years, and I didn't know that all my health history, which of course was thyroid cancer, and I had a jugular neck dissection, and it spread to my lymph nodes, and I have severe autoimmune issues to this day. I just didn't know. But in 2012, the kids were in 2nd grade. I found out about Coldwater Creek. I met with some people from Coldwater Creek. They interviewed me and they said, "Where do your kids go to school?" And I told them, and they said, "You ever hear about Westlake Landfill?" And I said, "Well, I knew there was a dump up there, but I didn't know anything about it. I smelled something." So I met, they referred me, and I met Dawn Chapman and Karen Nickel, and I began to learn what was going on. And at the time, I was always sick, but I felt sicker, and every day I kept getting sicker. This place is disease. It takes your heart away, it takes your spirit away, and something's got to end. Somebody's got to help us, because these people are stranded here. My kids are stranded here. Somebody from the outside has got to come and save us. Thank you.
Robin Daly.
Good evening, esteemed panel. My name is Robin Daly. I live in Spanish Village, less than a half a mile from Westlake Landfill, Bridgeton Landfill. Since the underground fire was discovered in 2010, our quality of life has been destroyed. Very seldom can we open our windows because of the horrendous odor being produced by the products of combustion that the fire is producing. Even when we don't smell the awful odor, the numerous toxins are still being admitted into the air that we breathe via the candlestick gas flares that are used to burn off the excess gases building up inside the landfill. Very seldom can we plan an outdoor event in our own backyard, nor can we plan to do simple yard work, because we never know when the horrible odor will show up and put an end to our plans. My husband has even had to wear a respirator to hang up Christmas lights, and this is not going to be the first year that he's done that. The odor wafts through the air and makes us nauseous. We have difficulty breathing, experience headaches, watery eyes, and skin rashes. The list is endless. How safe is it for us to be continually exposed daily and endure this onslaught to our human health 24/7, 365 for the past 5 years, let alone our poor environment? This is no way to live. This is not a normal life. This is anything but normal. This is almost criminal. What did we do wrong to deserve a retirement like this? We had no idea what kind of deplorable conditions that we would have to endure when we moved into our home. We are unable to sell our home now that we are 60-plus years of age. My husband is on disability. We don't deserve this. We thought we were doing everything right to achieve our American dream. We worked hard for 50 years. We raised our families. We paid our taxes, and this is what we've ended up with. This is not right. This is not safe. This is not healthy. There is nothing safe, clean, healthy, or sustainable in our environment where I and my husband live in Spanish Village. The whole surrounding area around this Westlake Landfill Superfund site has been poisoned beyond the point of no return. I think that all nearby residents should be removed immediately. I want our American dream restored to us. No upstanding American citizens should be subjected to this violation. As laid out in my country's Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Kathy Bell.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Bell. I live in Bridgeton, more specifically Spanish Village subdivision, which is a half mile from the landfills. I've lived there since 1996. When we moved there, we thought it was a great place to raise our family. Now, we worry about what our children may have been exposed to while they were growing up. For us, there is no dissipation of the radiological toxic cocktail due to our close proximity. Every day is like Russian roulette for us. It may have only one chamber loaded, but over time, it will catch up with us. Also, we don't know if it will be radioactive or a chemical shot of benzene, sulfur, pesticides, or any other combination of harmful substances brewing in the landfill. It can take many years for cancers, autoimmune, and other health issues to show up. We feel like guinea pigs. The Missouri Department of Natural Resources has said to limit our exposure, which means house arrest for us. What crimes did we commit? St. Louis County says that we may have to shelter in place. That might as well be suffer in place. We often wonder what long-term effects this exposure will have on us. We especially worry about the children in our neighborhood who play outside at times with no regard to the stench. Since the fire started at the landfill 5 years ago, our quality of life has suffered immensely. The stench can be so strong that it has at times seeped into our house, and that's with all of our windows closed. This stench causes headaches, burning, watery eyes, sore throats, and nosebleeds. It is like no other smell I have ever encountered, and one that I will never forget. It is hard to describe just how potent and awful that smell can be. We have the right to feel safe and to have the use of our home and property. Thank you.
Kirby Pemberton.
This is my daughter that I lost. My name is Kirby Pemberton. I was born July 8th, 1971 in Spanish Village in Bridgeton, Missouri. I lived there until 1977. I then moved to Maryland Heights, Missouri, where I still live today. To start my story, I was one of those young children being exposed to radioactive waste illegally dumped into the Westlake landfill in 1973. My family has experienced many medical issues, myself having trouble getting and maintaining pregnancies. I had a hysterectomy because of many masses in 2011, luckily all benign. I suffer now from headaches, nausea, anxiety, and depression. My husband in 2015 was diagnosed with a very aggressive prostate cancer. My oldest daughter, Kirsty, was diagnosed in 2000, 2 months before her 9th birthday, with a very rare brain tumor on her brainstem called a glioblastoma multiforme. This rare tumor is found in 60-year-old men and is one of the 27 confirmed tumors from ionizing radiation. Our young, beautiful 12-year-old daughter taken from us in 2004. My now oldest has not had a menstrual cycle in 4 years. My middle child suffers from chronic headaches, sore throats, nausea, bloody noses, and irritated eyes whenever outdoors. Had to quit her sport at her high school. So she literally shelters in place. She does not go outside. My youngest has many extra teeth and also suffers from headaches and bloody noses. Not as many since I switched her school, and now she's 5 miles away from the Bridgeton landfill. My family has spent our entire lives in this community, attending Pantonville schools and, yes, playing at BMAC for many years of our lives. This is shameful. Our lives matter more than money. You truly do not understand this if you have not been through this. Everybody that has been affected by this needs to be helped. We need this turned over to FUSRAP. This should have been done decades ago when this was put in there instead of being the worst and the best kept secret ever. Thank you.
Doug Clemens.
My name is Doug Clemens. I'm a lifelong resident of North County, St. Louis. I live in St. Anne, Missouri, was born in Bridgeton. I'm not going to speak about health issues because I think they're quite established. I've had neighbors, friends, relatives sick. What I want to talk about is the fact that I'm addressing a panel that is going to hopefully take this report to the United Nations. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a member of a country that established the idea of consent of the governed. We didn't consent to this. We didn't ask for weapons-grade radioactive waste to be put in our neighborhoods. And the government did it. The government condoned it and permitted it. We now have several rights violations. First and foremost, the health of our citizenry. We cannot expect to live a healthy, safe life, which our government is supposed to provide for us. We have restricted movements. We don't have folks standing there at a checkpoint with guns. We have poison in the air. So we can't leave our homes. We can't go to work without danger. I'm an American citizen. This is the land of the free. This is irresponsible on the behalf of my government. And I'm angry. I'm frustrated. And the idea that I have to appeal to the United Nations, an international organization, to deal with an issue that should be obvious to anyone who looks at it, and anyone who cares, any elected official who's interested in their constituency should take action immediately, and they have not. In 1984, the NRC said that this stuff was dangerous, and yet here we are today still talking about it. It's still in the same place. We've let it get out of hand, and that's irresponsible and unforgivable. Thank you.
Michael Scowen.
My name is Michael Schoen. I'm a resident of the Terracine Mobile Home Park directly across from the landfill. And I also work directly across the from the landfill at a pharmaceutical warehouse. I don't think I've opened my windows the whole 5 years that I've been in that area. It's a horrible place to be. I've lost 3 neighbors so far, a lot younger than they should have went. A young couple that were really good neighbors just moved when they had their baby because the baby started having breathing problems. They didn't even take any of their belongings. It's just a horrible place to live. I'm currently on FMLA due to headaches, so I worry about the people I live around. That's about it. It's just not a good place.
Steve Johnson.
Good evening, I'm Steve Johnson. I'm from Webster Groves. I'm a warehouse worker and a member of Teamsters Local 688. I'm here speaking on behalf of Marvin Kropp, President of Teamsters Joint Council 13, who regretfully couldn't be here tonight, as well as on behalf of members who work and live around the landfill. We are submitting a formal human rights complaint to the United Nations on the record against the corporate polluter, Republic Services, and those authorities that have looked the other way against this horrific environmental crime. At this time, let me say that workers, organized and unorganized, remain unprotected and inadequately informed about the exposure issues tied to the Republic Service burn and landfill complex and the thousands of tons of radioactive waste illegally dumped there. As Teamsters, we have to speak up against the gross negligence and the violations of our members and our neighbors' human rights. There are thousands of Teamsters families who work and live around the landfill, and thousands of workers at union and non-union shops surrounding the landfill. I myself have family and friends who have to work by and smell that landfill. The underground fire, which arose out of Republic Services negligence, has been burning for at least 5 years, and the company itself says it may burn for 5 more years, even though we cannot count how many times we've been promised that they will address it, and it'll be brought under control in a short amount of time. The radioactive waste has been dumped there illegally for over 40 years ago and left unmanaged, exposed to the elements, the water tables, and of course the threat of underground landfill fires. The Attorney General's own experts have found radiation migrating off-site. Cancer spiked in our area, yet many live and work around this site and literally can't even get away for a moment. Republic landfill workers cannot easily access their rights as workers or speak up without fear of retaliation, as they have no union. We fear that they may be exposed to radon as well as carcinogens daily, and feel that they have the greatest direct threat from a catastrophic failure that might occur at the site should this crisis escalate further. They deserve much better pay and health and safety protections, financial and operational. That's why we want to enter this human rights complaint on their behalf as well. The raging fire and its stench alone are a huge problem. Our members, our friends, our neighbors afflicted by Republic Services Westlake Bridgeton landfills report several unaddressed problems: respiratory afflictions, headaches, dizziness. Many experience bouts of cancer. Many old-timers, our very own union brothers and sisters with longer exposure, are not here anymore to tell their side of the story. That's why I'm here to speak. Okay. Going forward, we need an adequate response to protect the workers at the landfill, surrounding workplaces and residents. We demand respect for our voices at the workplace, and we demand that Republic Service and its owners, Bill Gates, be brought to account, stop paying the lobbyists, and stick up and instead become part of the solution. We demand that our government and its full weight behind our community, and ask that the United Nations monitor success resolution in this environmental crisis. Thank you.
Loretta Merchant.
That was my maiden name. Actually, my name is Loretta Copeland. I have lived around this area most of my life. I think a terrible injustice has been done and continues to this day, for not only me, but for everyone in this area. I opened a dog grooming business in Bridgeton, June 18, 2012. I devoted my life to this business over the next 3 years, endless hours, blood, sweat, and tears to create a successful, friendly environment for my customers and their furry family members. I was a member of the Better Business Bureau. In an effort to be close to my shop, I purchased a home in nearby Terrace and Mobile Home Park. A mere 0.5 miles from Westlake Landfill. Like many others, I purchased my home unaware that the landfill housed the oldest atomic weapons waste in the world, where 2 years prior an underground fire began in an adjacent Bridgeton landfill, and every day since has inched its way closer and towards the radioactive contamination waste. On September 3rd, 2015, the Attorney General released his court documents stating that the fire could reach the nuclear waste in as little as 90 days to 6 months. His experts also found high levels of radioactive waste contamination off-site. He stated that Westlake Landfill has poisoned its neighbors, contaminated the groundwater and the vegetation. In light of these documents, plus years of dealing with the infiltrating odor in my home and my shop, the uncertainties surrounding the landfill dangers, I decided to close the doors on my dream and walk away September 29, 2015. one of the saddest days of my life. I thought at this time my home was sold, but the deal fell through. That was the money I had planned on using to move from this mismanaged and neglected landfill. I am now stuck living 0.5 miles away from this nightmare with no income and no way out. I also would like to add that I lived in Florissant for over 10 years, where I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I suffer every day. It's an awful disease. Thank you.
Ed Smith.
Good evening. I'm Ed Smith with the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. I'm here today to address the radioactive part of this problem at the Westlake landfill and the problem that we've had with the federal government from the day that it was dumped there without permission to today. While legislation is introduced to give us a hope of the Corps of Engineers being put in charge, that's currently not the status of who's in charge of the landfill. And while as an environmentalist, I'm up here talking about how EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, I'm up here talking about how the Environmental Protection Agency has just mishandled this site. It's not an indictment of the agency as much as how complex this issue is and how they're not the right entity to be put in charge. So the radioactive wastes were dumped here in 1973 without the permission of the federal government. The landfill was never designed or permitted to contain these radioactive materials that'll be dangerous for tens of thousands of years. There's no liner that separates the radioactive waste from the groundwater. This is important because the landfill is in the Missouri River floodplain upstream from where several 100,000 Missourians get their drinking water in the metro St. Louis area. The radioactive waste at the landfill, some of which sit at the surface, are susceptible to be moved off-site if impacted by a flood, earthquake, fire, or tornado. There has been unauthorized movement of radioactive materials since they've been dumped there. Even the financially responsible parties were concerned about airborne contamination upon realizing this radioactive dirt had been moved, yet the Environmental Protection Agency didn't do anything. There was a smoldering and surface fire identified near the areas of radioactive materials in the 1990s. These fires were closer to the known areas of radioactive wastes than the ongoing smoldering fire. The EPA knew about these fires in 1995, yet they did not consider a fire, smoldering, or surface a threat to the radioactive waste at the landfill, leading up to its decision in 2008 to cap and leave the radioactive materials there forever. We are now being told by the EPA that there is no, quote, there is, quote, no imminent threat at the landfill, but that's not true. There will always be an imminent threat at the landfill as long as the radioactive wastes are allowed to stay there. A surface fire that burned grass near the radioactive materials in October is proof that there will always be an imminent threat as long as they're allowed to stay there. Thankfully, the wind was blowing away from the direction of the radioactive materials that day, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Megan Beckerman.
As if burning eyes, asthma, nightly breathing treatments, spontaneous bloody noses, chronic extremely swollen tonsils, all after our move into Bridgeton in 2010 weren't enough, my baby boy began losing patches of his hair. He was diagnosed with a rare form of alopecia. He has now not one single hair anywhere on his body. After researching and reading about the disease, I learned alopecia is an autoimmune disease likely triggered by exposure to environmental toxins and chemicals which confuse the immune system and cause it to attack the hair follicles. While researching, I also learned that I live 1.3 miles away from the Westlake landfill complex. My once vibrant, outdoor-loving 4-year-old is now stuck inside most days, as the state of Missouri's Department of Natural Resources is now issuing health advisories on particularly stinky days. They tell us to stay indoors and stay out of the odors, which is not an easy thing to do. Trevor cries and watches the other children play, not understanding why I tell him it isn't healthy to be outside. Trevor's new swing set that his daddy built for him before the state began issuing these health advisories is now just gazed at through the window. And that breaks his heart, so of course it breaks mine too. As a mom, it hurts to see Trevor upset when the other children make fun of his beautiful bald head at school, or when grown-ups stop him in grocery stores and ask him if he cut his own hair. He cried when he realized he couldn't participate in Crazy Hair Day at school. I cried too. His self-esteem, happiness, overall well-being and health are definitely slowly deteriorating. Environmental toxins triggered his little body to act this way. Everything I just spoke of has caused me to live in constant fear for my children's safety because of burning chemicals that are known for causing illnesses. I'm terrified because if burning chemicals that are known for causing illnesses can do this much damage, then I'm terrified to see how much damage is caused if the radioactive materials that are known for causing death begin to burn.
Okay, I'm going to try to pronounce this name. Anna Bezlanuk? Yeah.
My name is Anna Vasilonok. I do not live anywhere close to the landfill. I'm currently live in Chesterfield, Missouri. What I first became aware of dangerous situation around the West Lake about 2 years ago when the first information leaked into the local media. My first reaction was that I'm having a déjà vu nightmare. While we do not live in an area close to the landfill, I am a Chernobyl refugee. And for me, it sounds even more horrific. 20 years ago, I left my country. I left every single person I know, everything I had to save my child. I came to unknown with 5 bags of clothes. And we started all anew, hoping that we give our daughter a chance of life. And one of the visits to the doctor, when they asked us why did we came, because it was a very big Jewish refugee line, I said, no, we are not religious refugee. I'm used to be one Jew at school and in college. I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay, endangering my child every single day with the Chernobyl. The old doctor looked at me and said, oh, honey, you picked your own place. I didn't understand at that point what did he mean. But then the more I researched the landfill, I figure out the meaning. And I figure out that this is not a nightmare. This is a horrific reality. And the way the United States is handling this situation puts our country on the same list with countries that face of the human rights violation. Nazi Germany conducting hazardous biological and chemical experience on human beings without their consent. I can't call it anything else but the human being experiment. Syria using known hazardous chemicals against its population. What is the United States doing now? Soviet Union, intentional disinformation about potential dangers of the radioactive exposure and everyday exposure to other hazardous materials after Chernobyl catastrophe. We've been told that that's okay, that there is nothing serious and everything will be all right. So United States doing exactly the same thing. And the persecution of people who stand up to the main opinion. We've seen it on all of us. We've been called names. The Attorney General has been calling a career-making person because he's defending the rights of people who live around that neighborhood. Westlake landfills violates basic human rights, right to life. Every person has a right not to be killed by another person. And yet, this constant everyday exposure to radioactive and other hazardous materials slowly killing hundreds of people. Right to water. The human rights to water entitles everyone to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physical, accessible to the water and our water intakes down the street. In addition, it violates the right to clean air and rights to health. More important, as we all heard of sick people, it violates the future generation rights, and me being a teacher, it hurts the most. The present generation have the responsibility of ensuring that the needs and interests of present and future generations are fully safeguarded. By ignoring the problems that are associated with the radioactive waste for so many years, it violates that basic human right, knowing that our children will be safe. Furthermore, all those chemicals that are located in the landfill still will get more harmful with the time and will cause more damage for even further generations. It will last for more than 3, 4, or as we say, 10 generations. It will last forever, for as long as people are living around it.
Byron Clemens.
I want to thank the jurist, and I want to thank all the people who've come and testified. And I hope that Mr. Knox gets to feel this. The people who are here are representing thousands and thousands of other people. We've had to deal with this waste for decades, the time that I've known about it. My father worked a half a mile away from the airport site and contracted a fairly rare cancer and survived that. My brother and I grew up next to Coldwater Creek. Coldwater Creek runs through our property. One of the issues is multiple paths of exposure. So in these hearings we go to, we went to one just recently. I sat next to a woman who moved from one area to another, was exposed to the same waste in different areas. Then she moved to Ellisville, which is where Russell Bliss's property is now being developed, and it's contaminated with dioxin. So this is an international issue. I have to say that the waste that we're talking about here, it's the same waste that people mentioned Coldwater Creek. There are a few other sites. It goes back to what was called Congo pitchblende. And I'm even concerned about the mine that it came from in Congo, now the Republic of Congo now, that's been abandoned. The material from it is called uranium-235. It's fissile material. Part of the way that the United States government and the Manhattan Project could make the bombs so quickly is that it had a high amount of uranium-235 in it. That's what you make bombs with. This material is unguarded. We know where the hot spots are. I have to say, if there were an evildoer, they could find some of this waste pretty easily. Multiple paths of exposure that we've encountered, including, I live in Webster Groves right now. I'm a property owner in Bridgeton, but people have mentioned drinking water. This is upstream for drinking water intakes for North County as well as the city of St. Louis. The waste from this has contaminated haul routes throughout the area, from Broadway and Destrehan out to St. Charles. But this Westlake landfill material was illegally dumped. So I told you we were next to Coldwater Creek. In 1973, I worked for the St. Louis County government. There was a flood that year, and one of our jobs was to remove sandbags from the flood. You know where we would deposit the sandbags. And as we came through the gate to take the sandbags in Westlake landfill, the people who worked there said, "Don't go over in that area. It's contaminated." I want you to know that the owners at that time knew that there was radioactive waste being illegally dumped there. And so one of our human rights is equal rights under the law. whether it's international law, local, or federal. But it seems that Bill Gates, Microsoft Bill Gates, the largest shareholder of Republic Services, does not answer to the same law that regular working people do. Thank you.
Don Chapman.
Good evening. My name is Dawn Chapman. I'm a resident of Maryland Heights, Missouri, and I live approximately 2 miles from Westlake Bridgeton Landfill Superfund site. In January 2013, I became aware of the site and learned that there was an underground fire and also that the site contained the oldest nuclear weapons waste in the world from the Manhattan Project. Until then, I had no idea I lived next to a Superfund site or what a Superfund site was. Since then, myself along with Kieran and other moms have spent countless hours educating and traveling to meet with elected officials in the hope that they would understand the site better and could advocate for us. I've hosted over 30 open to the public community meetings as well as participated in countless public educational panel discussions in an attempt to spread the word and educate the public about the site they live next to. Many still have no idea. Every week something changes at this site. It's like watching a slow-moving tornado. The findings from the state of Missouri's fire experts leave us going to bed at night and putting our kids on the school bus not knowing if at any minute something might go wrong at this site. When our kids leave for school in the morning, we don't know if they will get on the bus after school. If an emergency happens at this landfill, the districts have made it very clear that our kids will have to shelter in place at school for an infinite period of time, and that we won't be allowed to come and get our kids until the emergency response team declares everything is clear and safe. I can't describe to you as a parent how that feels, and to know that this could have been prevented by both EPA and Republic, and to know that other fires have occurred at this site makes it even worse. I have 3 kids. I have 5.5, 7.5, and a 10-year-old. I tell my 10-year-old in the morning that if anything happens at school and I can't get to them, never to leave the siblings. I tell him to go to the bathroom with them. You don't ever let them split you guys up. You ride on the same bus together. That is a conversation I never thought I would ever have to have with my kids, ever. And it is a heavy weight for a 10-year-old boy to have to carry when he goes to school on the bus every morning. Our kids ride a bus that passes the landfill every morning and the emissions and odor creeps in. There are reports of children who stand out at bus stops on mornings when the odor is so bad, who go into school with their clothing smelling from it. Other children have bullied them, saying they smell like the burning landfill. Recently, one of the local school districts sent home a letter stating that if our children take medication at home, we should consider storing some at school in case of emergency situations should occur at the landfill. No parent should have to open their child's book bag and pull out a letter like this. The EPA Superfund program has failed this community and they have failed our children. Thank you.
That's all the testimony. Okay, so that's going to be the end of the testimony section. The jurists are going to get together, and if you can, please turn your testimonies in up here in this box. The jurists will get together and they will talk amongst each other, and we will reconvene at 8:25. Our jurists are getting ready here. If you guys could all quiet down just a little bit. I want to thank everyone that participated in the testimony, gave their witness. I honestly wish that I could listen to every single person in this room. I want to thank our jurists, all of them, for coming out. And at this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to Ms. Lois Gibbs.
So thank you all for coming out. I want to repeat what Karen said. The jury felt very strongly about the passion in your voices and appreciate all of that. After hearing the testimony tonight from the witnesses, this jury has agreed on a number of findings and 3 recommendations. These are preliminary findings and recommendations. But before I tell you what those are, I want you to know that we will continue to take testimony until December 31st. And then in January, we will, put my glasses on so I can read. In January, we will submit our findings and recommendations to John Knox from the UN Human Rights and Environment Special Reporter, and he's in the United States at UN in New York City, and submit it to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. If you signed in when you came into the building here, we will notify all those who we have addresses to of what the filing is and where it went, and you can get a copy of it as well if you so want one. So here is what the jurors' preliminary findings and recommendations are. It's on the other side. We have found evidence on health impacts, rates of cancer, rates of respiratory disease, immune system problems. We found a huge amount of evidence around chronic effects such as nosebleeds, headaches, rashes. There was evidence of the loss of future generations' health and future generations' potential. And potential is things about their ability to reach their birth potential professionally, as well as their potential to give birth to healthy children or to live a very long life. We also found impacts on property, the loss of enjoyment of people's property, the loss of use of property, the freedom of movement. I think there was a number of people who talked about house arrest, trapped in their homes, unable to leave, and the loss of value. So you can't sell your house, you can't stay in your house is there, and it has become a prison. And we feel that's a very strong piece of evidence. Third, we found evidence of sort of multiple paths for individual families and families within the community of exposure that results in health impacts and other impacts, where folks are workers and then they also live in the community, so they're exposed in the workplace, they're exposed at home, their children are exposed at home and at school, that there are so many paths that you can't really look at a single path and even a single definition of where the line is around the site of safety. We found evidence of loss of businesses and income to support families. Workers on the ground, we found violation of workers' rights. They were unprotected, uninformed, and something the Human Rights Committee really cares about is they can't speak out because they will lose their job. We found strong evidence of stress, which is emotional stress, individual stress, family stress, the loss of family time because of a number of things, including being sick or fighting the good fight, loss of quality of time of family. So even when you have your family with you, you are unable to go out and play in the yard or go to the park, you're trapped in your house. And then lastly, we found evidence of an unstable nature of the site. That was the best words we could come up with. But it really addresses the issue around earthquakes that someone had mentioned, the potential for a Chernobyl-like event, that it's just not safe. You don't know what's going to happen, so it's an unstable situation which creates additional violations. So those are a summary. We're going to write them up much longer, much more elegant than this. But those are our findings as jurists. And these are the 3 recommendations, again, preliminary recommendations that we have decided are proper and need action. The first one is there needs to be an immediate, permanent relocation for homeowners and renting families that want to move that are located within 1 mile of the Westlake Bridgeton Superfund fence line. It's recommendation 1. Recommendation 2 is there must be an opportunity for homeowners and families, renting families, who live within 5 miles of the Westlake Bridgeton Superfund site to move within a period of time, such as 3 to 5 years, or until Westlake Bridgeton Superfund site is cleaned up and no longer poses a public health or environmental health risk. This is especially important since once they start doing cleanup, you have no idea of whether those activities will result in additional health risk from releases. There's a recognition that people beyond the 1 mile are being exposed, but there'll be additional exposure further out as well. The third recommendation is that since the U.S. EPA and Republic Services has made a bad situation worse, consequently there is an urgent need to authorize the Army Corps of Engineers, FUSRAP, to take charge of the cleanup at Westlake Superfund site. They are the most qualified government agency to provide a safe and permanent solution for the radioactive waste. They offer better protection for the workers, and they have a program for healthcare assistance to the public. These are our 3 preliminary recommendations that we are going to move forward. And if people have comments on these recommendations, we would suggest that you send them to us again. You can work through Just Moms, or if you're on the mailing list, we will we'll be circulating stuff on that mailing list through Just Moms. So that is the conclusion of this hearing. I want to encourage people to have people submit further testimony, really looking at the human rights dimension. The more evidence you have, the more we submit, the better chance we have that the United Nations will be willing to take a look at this. Again, I want to thank you for coming out this evening, and a special thank you to my fellow jurists and to Karen, who moderated this evening's event. Thank you.